Hi there. So if you've been watching the last few videos, you might have thought to yourself, are there good resources out there to learn about the history of women in science who aren't not necessarily of European ancestry? And the answer is that, yeah, there are. There's some really good resources out there, but it's a bit different. You're not going to get as many individual standalone biographies. What you're going to get instead is a lot of books that feature a bunch of mini biographies. And that's going to be your starting point, and it's a good starting point to then find other people to investigate and track down other even harder to find resources. So they're harder to find, these books are. And they set you down paths of research that are even harder to dig up material on, but it's worth it for the stories that you get to hear. So first off, I'm going to look at my life, which is story of 20 Japanese women scientists. For the longest time, finding stories about Japanese women scientists was one of the hardest things. I kept trying to put together resources and just never quite having enough. And this book is great because it's a story about the first 20 women to win the Saruhashi Award, which is a Japanese award for excellence for excellence in science given only to women. And this is a great collection of those scientists who are kind of each year represented as the top of their field. So really worth it for telling stories that it's really hard to find otherwise. China is a little bit easier to find work about women scientists, whether that's because of, a party line of we have gender equality, and therefore we're going to celebrate the work of women equally with men in science, or just vagaries of the publishing industry, cultural things. There's just more to deal with. I'm going to first start off with one that I haven't read yet. This is a source book of women scientists in ancient China, and it is entirely in Chinese. That makes it a little bit less accessible to some of you. Certainly to me, I am learning Chinese right now, specifically to be able to read this book someday, maybe 8 years from now. But it's out there, so if you do have Chinese, it's a really cool one because finding information about ancient figures is very difficult. And that this book even exists is a heartening thing. But let's say that you want to read books in English. Then there's a couple of ones on individual figures. One about Qianxiang Wu, the particle researcher, the one who performed the experiment, which broke parity. This is a good source on her life, the first lady of physics research, and just about how dominant she was a force in doing absolutely rigorous, no doubt about them, physics experiments in the middle of the 20th century. So that's a really good one. This one, about the discovery of the anti-malarial artemisinin, is one of my least favorite women in science books ever. The amount of material on here actually about her is maybe 20% of the book, and the rest is just an incredibly laboriously detailed accounting of how communist China sets up the different subdivisions of research within their scientific system, and it's very instructive about how does research science happen in China, but that doesn't mean it's particularly interesting to read. And if you're reading it for her, it's even more kind of disappointing. But it is out there, so I need to put it on the list as something. Moving to India, there is not as much as you would hope for the number of distinguished Indian women scientists out there. The ratio of that to the number of books about them is very small, at least in terms of things that I've been able to find. We have the one that we talked about during the section about physicians, about the life of Anandabai Joshi. It's still cool. It's a really interesting story about the first Indian woman to get a medical degree, and who died so tragically young that she didn't get a chance to really put it to the purpose that she wanted to. But if you want other stories, one of the surprisingly great place to go is a book called The Girl's Guide to a Life in Science. This book features a number of currently practicing Indian scientists in all kinds of different disciplines. And it's a great jumping off point to discover these different figures and kind of dig a bit deeper into them. So it's a really cool book. You can give it to an adolescent if you would like, to kind of see like, hey, here's some different women currently doing science. But if you're also just looking for, hey, who are some figures that I can look into a little bit, and kind of look at their work and what they're up to in India right now, it's a great book for that. So, don't be scared away by the fact that it looks like, oh, it's a kid's book. The science that these people are doing is heavy duty stuff, and worth a look. So yeah, it's a surprisingly, shockingly good guide for start points. I have the hardest time with South America. I probably every couple of months I do a new search to try and run through and see if I can find books dedicated to South American women scientists in one way or another, either in English or in Spanish. You'll find books written in Spanish about women scientists, but they are about, like, your Marie Curies and your Emmy Noethers and those sorts of people. They're not about actual South American women scientists. So the one that I've found, and it's got some neat perspectives about what it's like to be have South American heritage and be doing work in the United States very often, is Paths to Discovery, autobiographies from Chicanas with careers in science, mathematics, and engineering. And it's put together as a series of basically memoirs, as a series of little essays from people about what their experience has been. So it is limited by the number of people that this particular group could get to write, lengthy, 10, 15 page reflections on their life. But it's also very interesting because the challenges that you have coming from a South American background are very unique. And so it's a great book for that. But yes, if you have any other sources, please let me know, because I'd like to have more than a book on that particular subject. And that brings us to the group that there is the most written about, at least in English, which is African American women scientists. And there's quite a decent amount, not as much as there should be, of course, but compared to the groups that we've just looked at, where, I can scrounge up a book or maybe 3 books, there's quite a bit more. Part of this is due single-handedly to the work of Jeanette Brown, who produced not one, but 2 different books about African American women chemists. And that's just a neat thing to have. Is that one of them is kind of looking back, over the history, and then the other one is looking at more modern day. So her 2 books are pretty essential reading in this area. Sort of the foundational text for all this stuff, though, is Winnie Warren. This book, Black Women Scientists in the United States, is foundational. It's got so many miniature biographies, so many paths to explore, hundreds of figures in this one. And each one is only covered from 1 to 3 pages, but that you have so many figures provides so many starting points. So this is kind of a foundational text. This is kind of where you start. Say, I'm interested in maybe learning more about African American women's contributions to physics. Then you kind of start here and then that leads you on other paths. So this is sort of an essential book for the shelf. So distinguished African-American scientists of the 20th century. This is just a straight-up encyclopedia of important scientists. It's not limited to women scientists, but they are in here. So if you kind of put it together with Winnie Warren, you've got two good fundamental sources to use for exploring new avenues. So yeah, James Kessler, you can find this guy. It's not too uncommon and not too expensive. So that's nice. Of course, this conversation wouldn't be complete without talking about Hidden Figures, but you don't need me to tell you to go out and read Hidden Figures. Just go out and read Hidden Figures. What are you doing? So that one's fine. It's great, and of course it's great, and you already know that, and I don't need to tell you that. Johnson's autobiography should be arriving soon, so that's one to kind of put on your pull list for a bit later. Another kind of neat source that you wouldn't expect is Send Us a Lady Physician, Women Doctors in America. And what's nice about it is that it has a nice chapter about the first Black women physicians in America. So there's just a whole section in here which is devoted towards finding as many women, Black women in the 19th century, early 20th century who got medical degrees and telling as much of their story as can be found. Of course, so many of these figures, their stories are just in little pieces here and there. And this one kind of puts as many together as it can and is, again, a good jumping off point for that sort of stuff. So it's another good resource to check out, not only for just the general subject of American women physicians, but more particularly the story of Black women physicians and where you can go from there. And from there you can go to like Sarah Fraser, who we talked about in the physician's biography, and other figures like that. Now, there are other books out there, more academic volumes put out by academic presses that go into more detail about different communities of women scientists. The problem is they are ridiculous expensive. So there's a cool book that I want to get called Women Engineers in Turkey by Berna Zengin, but it's COVID times. I don't have the money to do that. There's a bunch of others from academic presses. So what I've tried to highlight here are books that you can, that tell a bunch of very good stories, but that also are within the reach of a normal person's, hobby checkbook, which is where most of us are who do this sort of stuff. So those are some sources. If you've got others, send them in. Next time, we are going to be looking at physics. So get yourself ready for that, and we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.